This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome into our B-Town Year in Review episode. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. Joining us today, Linda Borg of the Providence Journal, Jim Hummel of the Hummel Report, and Steve Klamkin of WPRO News. All right, so we made it. Here we are, December 2020, in this monster year. You know, some light at the end of the tunnel. They're rolling out the vaccine, but at the moment, can you believe it? Rhode Island, the COVID capital of the world. And look, that whole dark winter conversation that we've been hearing about, and you'll hear this discussed in the upcoming episode, but that is pretty realistic. We are definitely in for some tough times right now. But today, here on B-Town, we kind of look back on the year with three of the most respected journalists in the state. Linda Borg of the ProJo, the Hummel Report's Jim Hummel, and WPRO Steve Klamkin, just kind of breaking down what this year was in terms of coverage, in terms of the different angles, and in terms of just processing everything that happened. Obviously, COVID dominates the year, but it was a significant year in social justice following the death of George Floyd and even locally with Jamal Gonzalez. And look, it was a presidential election year, a lot of local elections that really kind of moved the needle for the progressive flank of the Democratic Party here in the state, opening up doors for women in terms of local elections. So much went on this calendar year. And look, through over 100 podcast episodes, through, 100 and something live streams, either in the room with the governor or out in the field covering protests, whatever it may be, and even through some radio and television stuff, it's been a privilege to serve you with content. And I can't thank you enough for trusting me and letting me into your world as we navigate 2020. So we're going to get right into it today. Lots of good stuff in the episode, kind of a short monologue here so we can get right to it. But I would be remiss if I didn't remind you, coming up next week, it'll be the Best of B-Town 2020 edition. We'll count down numbers 20 through 11 on Tuesday, and then the top 10 episodes of the year on Friday. You'll hear clips from those respective episodes. This is partially based on a fan poll, partially based on the science, the actual download numbers, stream numbers, shares, so on and so forth, and partially based on my opinion, based on what I think, and also what I've heard from you out there in the field all year. So that's the Best of B-Town 2020. That'll be airing next week, and I appreciate all of you who sent me a message or tweeted at me, kind of throwing your 2 cents into this conversation, and got a lot of response. And what was interesting was the diversity of opinion. You know, it was actually a super difficult list to make because looking back on the show, especially back into the early spring, right when we were in lockdown, ostensibly, right? We were doing shows like every day. We were doing podcasts like every day. And some of those episodes were super powerful. And I probably could have even selected the majority of the top 20 from that period. But it's spread out. You'll see next week. I'm not going to give away too much at this exact moment. Today, we focus on this outstanding panel that we have for you. B-Town's Year in Review. It's coming at you right now on Rhode Island's podcast of record, the Bartholomew Town Podcast. An all-star panel, if there ever were such a thing here, ladies and gentlemen, the great Linda Borg, the one and only Jim Hummel, and the incredible Steve Klamkin, ladies and gentlemen. You know, this year, you would have assumed we'd be talking elections right now. In terms of, if we were thinking about a year ago, looking at December 2020, you'd think elections and getting into some, Providence school conversations. And that's sort of on the back burner at minimum. We'll put it that way. Steve, Jim, and I, we've been on the front lines, if you will, of this COVID story that has just spiraled into the entire year. And Linda, you've been covering the educational component of that, which is a major factor, especially right now as it stands likely that schools are going to close. I guess let's go one by one. First of all, just your overall take on 2020 and how COVID has defined this year for you, and, how it's affected your coverage of other things. I guess we'll start with Linda.
I guess I would say I thought this would be the year of the Providence takeover. I thought that's all I'd be writing about. I thought would have real meat on the bones. Instead, there's been some shuffling at the top, which teachers say is largely a formality. There doesn't seem to be any kind of real in-depth plan for how schools are going to look different. And a thing that I normally would be covering the hell out of, and I've barely touched, is we have 2 big box charters moving in. I was just looking at the data this morning. By the time Excel and AF, Achievement First, build out, we're looking at multiple millions of dollars that are going to be moved out of the Providence public schools with an already shaky budget situation. So I find I'm writing as much about medicine as education. And I feel like I've kind of lost focus a little bit on the meat and bones of what I cover, because all I'm doing is COVID's impact on schools.
Can I jump in a second? Linda, you bring back the Providence school takeover, which I think has been almost totally lost in all of this, because when it comes to the schools, we who are generalists don't specialize in the schools, have almost exclusively focused on the impact of COVID on the schools and the school's response and what they're doing to deal. So you're absolutely right. That's been obviously COVID has overridden everything. And, I've practically forgotten about the Providence takeover. And you're right. I'm coming into 2020. That was one of the hot topics.
Yeah. And I suppose really it's kind of risen to the surface here at least in the fall, where the decision to close down the school, if in terms of Providence, rests in the same folks who are making the decisions on a statewide basis. And that's been something that Mary Beth Calabro and the union have pushed back on strongly. So there is some element, but you're right. By and large, no one really thinks of the Johns Hopkins report. When they hear Johns Hopkins, they're thinking of a totally different set of statistics these days. Steve, kind of continuing with your thoughts there on 2020 and how it's taken you down this very specific pathway.
Well, you started out saying that we've been on the front lines, and really we have not when compared to the healthcare workers, the people who work in the supermarkets, the people who provide the bus transportation and all of that. We're just out covering the scene. And, at times you feel a little wary about your coverage and how close you are to other people. And we've all had a hand, I think, in covering some of the protests that went on this summer over George Floyd's death and so forth. But those two elements, the coronavirus and the response to and the violence and the rallies and protests in the wake of George Floyd's death, really, I think, are the two top stories of the year. It's obviously turned everything topsy-turvy for us, just like it has for everybody's lives. I mean, look at us. We'd be sitting around a table talking about all this right now.
Right. And Hummel, that specifically impacted your work in a couple of ways. First of all, Lively was put on hold for months right in the thick of COVID, which I know we've talked about. That was something at minimum aggravating. And then also, your video journalism has been impacted, but you've still been able to be sort of the driving force behind a number of different stories, particularly small businesses and the grant programs throughout this, really going back to the summer. So how's this year been for you in terms of COVID and the sort of niche areas you focused on within that?
Well, you know how they do those stories at the end of the year and they come up with the catchwords? The word for 2020 is going to be pivot, right? Everybody's had to pivot. And you hit it right on the head. My bread and butter is going out doing long form video investigations. And we're still doing that. But with the 6 foot distancing, it's not easy to ambush anybody these days. So that's kind of all been put on hold. And we kind of ambush them from afar, right? Steve, you and Bill and I. At the,
no one's been hummeled lately.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not happening.
I'm not going in with a 6 foot stick like some of those local TV reporters, which is ridiculous. Yeah. So we put fortunately, I've had the partnership with the Providence Journal, Lynn, since 2017. And so the pivot was really to go to pretty much all written stories back in the old days, Lynn, right? You make a couple of calls and there we are. But it's had the same effect because of that partnership. And I have a great partnership with WPRO, of course, with Rhode Island PBS. So we're going out in multiple spokes. I just think, and I've gotten back to some of the video investigations, but I got to tell you, we do those nice stories too, which confuses people, the Rhode Island Spotlight. Like I want to do a nice story and I'm not jumping out from behind a bush. I did my first Spotlight story of the year in November because those are video driven. And so I'm beginning to get back to that, but I think that the chapters are still yet to be written. We're going into a really dark, I hate to use the cliche, a dark winter. Now, fortunately, all of us can do our jobs and we have the technology to do it. Think of the people who can't do that and who the unemployment benefits have run out. And Congress is so impotent that they can't at least get a check out the door. And look, Rhode Island's always had struggles to begin with. Now it's all magnified. And even during the best of times, we were running a $200 million deficit. So I don't wish ill on anybody. As Steve said, we just kind of cover it day to day. But I have real concerns about where we're going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 months out. And you mentioned the business that I've been covering, Bill. The governor doesn't seem, or maybe she does recognize, but doesn't seem to put a priority on. If you don't have those businesses generating all of the tax revenue, where are you going to be in 21, 22, 23? It's not now. They'll get a pile of money from the government to bail us out, just like they've been doing for decades. But where are we going to be in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now? That's my concern.
Absolutely. And Linda, of course, one of the major drivers of industry is education. And, we think about Providence and the problems in the schools, and really on a statewide basis, the statewide performance. I mean, they didn't do RICAST this year, but the results that they did do in various surveys show that it's pretty pitiful in many senses, Rhode Island's public education. So what does that say about the outcomes of 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now in terms of attracting industries and trying to keep the wheels turning here in the state with the next generation, if you will?
The first thing I would point out, and I'm not the first, this has been a national education conversation, is going remote affects the disenfranchised the worst. So despite the governor's efforts to get Wi-Fi and computers to everybody, there's been estimates that kids last year lost anywhere from 3 to 9 months of learning. So I think the struggle now is a Barrington can afford to do hybrid because it's small and it's wealthy and its teachers are less likely to get sick. They're not living on top of each other. But if we go totally remote for Providence, which I assume is coming, those kids just fall further and further behind. So I think what the pandemic is going to do is really spread the inequities between the have and the have-nots. And tonight there's a budget hearing on CCRI, and I hear there's going to be huge pushback from faculty about budget cuts. So the other problem is colleges. I mean, colleges have for years been underfunded in Rhode Island. You add that to the COVID impact of kids not wanting to pay tuition for distance learning, I think you're going to have real budget issues with the 3 public colleges.
Yeah.
Lynn, what about the ripple effects that if you lose that year? So let's say you're a 3rd grader and you're going to 4th, and you have a 4th grade teacher who's expecting them to have a certain level of what they learned in 3rd grade, and it's not there. That ripple effect goes for years. What do you do about that?
It's really, unless you do, some districts are doing intensive summer remediation. I think unless you offer something like that, or after school tutoring, LA, I think has a whole like an afternoon tutoring thing. You can't, particularly in elementary, you can't catch up. It's just impossible.
Can't.
Yeah, it's brutal. And that widening gap, if you will, is something that we saw earlier in the pandemic. I remember figuratively screaming about zip codes and just trying to gain an understanding of where we were seeing it, the virus pop up the most. And there's no question that for the most part, those communities that are most impacted are the ones that have the least brick and mortar healthcare facilities in terms of testing, with translation, with transportation that's adequate for folks. So we've seen that here in Rhode Island, that spread between haves and have-nots, if nothing else, become more clear to the everyday observer, I would say, here in 2020.
To be fair, I think we've heard that both from the education commissioner, from the health director. They have an awareness, probably a high awareness, of the inequities that COVID has posed in both of their areas. The solving of it is, yet to be seen, I think.
This year, we've also had this emergence of Governor Raimondo, certainly looking at the General Assembly and their lack of action, which is a significant conversation in and of itself. But at the same time, looking at Governor Raimondo as a household figure and emerging with her television and radio press conferences on a regular basis, and people really looking to her and the state, if you will, in a way that I can't remember ever in my life ever experiencing before. I guess, Steve, start your take on that.
Well, in times of crisis and emergency, we look to our leaders. We've not seen much leadership from the federal level, and which is to say, it seems President Trump has not been fully engaged in all of this and poo-pooed it to some extent. This is the COVID crisis, and it has left it to the governors. And I think Governor Raimondo, to her credit, I think has done as well as she could when dealt a bad hand, as she keeps pointing out. It's worn thin with a lot of people, to be fair. And, Jim has done a great job in holding her feet to the fire. And some of these, you and I, Bill and Linda, you've been to some of these briefings that the governor's conducted. Few people have done as much as you have, Jim, to focus her on problems that businesses are facing. But, when you're a governor, you have to think of everybody under your wing. You'd like to think a president would do that as well, but that doesn't seem to have happened, at least as far as the COVID crisis goes. So we look to our leaders, and I think she answered the call.
Well, you think of Joe Garrahy during the blizzard of 78. You think
the
of
flannel shirt.
The first day he took office, he had to close the credit unions. I think of Don Kacheri during the Station nightclub fire. All of those were defining moments in those governors' tenures, but they were for short periods of time.
Yeah.
They were in and out, and they went on for a couple of weeks. I mean, we've been dealing with this, and you remember those, man, remember every day when we used to go, we didn't go initially, but to those press conferences.
Every day.
Yep.
The issue, so look, it cuts both ways, and I think it's pretty clear, and it's a total failure of leadership by the General Assembly. Dominic Ruggiero was in a primary fight, turned out not to be as hard as he thought it was going to be. Nick Mattiello ultimately lost because he was in the fight of his life. The last thing he wanted to do was be making decisions, hard decisions that might affect that election. So let's call it what it is. There were General Assembly members I knew who wanted to come back and get involved. It was one man keeping them down. And he ultimately paid the price for that, whether voters factored that in or not. So now we're left with kind of this crap sandwich of where do we go from here? And I really think that the governor, the only thing I would say, and I people hear me question here, I think for the most part, she's done a pretty decent job. Here's the problem. A lot of those people standing up on the stage have never run a small business, and they've never lost a paycheck. So you've heard me talk about, and I don't have a vendetta against state workers. They haven't had furloughs. They haven't had paychecks. There are a lot of people who haven't had a paycheck since March. And those are the people that I'm trying to focus on. So when they craft these programs that sound great, and she uses the word immediate, we're going to get the money out the door. That sounds great on the podium. What we're reporting, and this is what we as reporters, Steve and Lynn and I, have done for our whole lives, is to, okay, let's get to the truth of what really the problem is. And I think as I get older, I get more aggravated because maybe I just don't care at this point, but I've lived in this state and I've worked in this state for almost 40 years. It's the second, third, fourth, fifth question that sometimes gets the answer. And so I think the governor's overall managed it as well as she can, but when you keep it tight like this, then you've got to accept the responsibility when you make errors.
Just a reminder that when she took these briefings to the State House, we had no opportunity to ask questions, but for this weird online setup that was not very workable. And you and others pushed to get this into a live context is why we're doing these in the vets. Let me just point out one other thing, if I might. Structurally, Rhode Island is set up with a strong legislature and a weak governor who essentially does the legislature's bidding, both from a budgetary standpoint and pretty much from every standpoint. So this has turned topsy-turvy, more like a Massachusetts situation where you have a different structure. You have a strong governor and a relatively weaker legislature. So seems to have worked. And, but for those people who've been complaining that Rhode Island has suffered by not having its legislature in session, I think that's a really small crowd. I don't think the legislature was missed, frankly. People will be upset. I might have said that, but I don't know what they were going to do. I mean, what are you going to legislate when you're handing out a series of executive orders?
Well, I think they could have stepped in on the nursing homes with oversight, with the way the money's being spent, because we really don't have a full accounting. The portal's like a month behind. All of a sudden, so I talked to the wedding and event people yesterday. They said they met with Commerce, and Commerce said, sorry, we have no more money. So how did we go from 500 million to 300 million? And that's millions and millions. That's tens of millions of dollars. It's an amazing amount of money. How can they say now we don't have any more? So that's, Steve, where I think the legislature could have stepped in, figured it out, gone to the convention center, not the convention center, but wherever, the vets. And if they really wanted to do it, they would have done it.
Yeah, and that's something we saw the Republicans call for. I think it was back in June on the steps of the State House. They and I've heard privately from, and I'm sure we all have heard privately from some Democrats that said, hey, look, we want to be back in there, but that's not the marching orders that we've received, so to speak. Discover over 200 episodes of Rhode Island's podcast of record, the Bartholomew Town Podcast, on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your pods. Or head over to our website, ripodcast.com. Hey, folks, B-Town is a listener-supported operation, and there's a few ways that you may help to sustain this program. Number one, go ahead and share this episode on social media or tell someone about it. Number two, leave a rating and review wherever you're listening right now. And number three, if you want to go a step further, for as little as $3 per month, you may help to sustain the independent journalism, opinion, analysis, and entertainment that we've become known for. Simply head to patreon.com/BartholomewTown or click the support link wherever you're listening right now. Now get this, for $10 per month, you may become a B-Town insider. You'll get exclusive monthly content, including commentary from yours truly and people like Ted Nisi, Ian Donis, Dr. Louis Daniel Munoz. That's the $10 per month level on patreon.com/BartholomewTown, or just simply click that support link wherever you're listening right now. Let's pivot now to one of the other major storylines of the year, social justice. And certainly, Steve, I know I've seen you out there. There was a night a couple of months ago where we were out following the Jamal Gonzalez incident where, things got dicey in terms of tear gas flowing, explosives, and so on and so forth. Was this a particularly noteworthy year in that regard from your perspective in terms of the movement, but also your coverage?
Well, absolutely. And following as it did the June 1st protest in the wake of George Floyd's killing, which I think was a real wake-up call. I mean, this happened around the country, essentially around the world as well. But you had it come home here. I mean, it devolved, unfortunately, the June 1st event devolved into some violence and vandalism in and around the Providence Place Mall, right in the shadow of the State House. But when you had, by most estimates, about 10,000 people come out marching in the streets calling for social justice, I mean, people need to, or have, woken up. We were out Monday, about, people, Black Lives Matter group, concerned about the spread of COVID inside the walls of the ACI. They've not gotten as much coverage as they likely wouldn't have had as much coverage had it not been for the social movement that's really gelled around the killing of George Floyd and other inequities around the country.
Yeah, no doubt about it. How is that translated on your end, Linda, in terms of, curriculum is something that we hear a lot from folks like Keith Stokes that say, look, we should be revising how we teach our kids history locally and globally immediately. What's that been like?
I think the sort of the hidden takeaway or the positive takeaway in all this is how youth have been leading some of these movements. Young Voices, that new group, Jay Shell's group, who we interviewed months ago, she's just a rock star. So it has really empowered youth to take on the civil rights struggle, to get their voices heard. Providence Student Union has been fighting for civics education for years. And I think even though we lost the lawsuit that would have mandated civics, it has certainly gotten both teachers and youth talking about, all right, we don't even know how our government works. I remember one young student telling me that she had no idea how to vote. Someone had to teach her outside of the school how you even do that. So I think it's been really empowering for youth, and I think they have acquitted themselves and run some really peaceful, organized rallies. So props to them, I would say.
And don't you think it's a wake-up call, Lynn, for those of us who live out in the suburbs? You know, we've seen Rhode Island change, but I don't think we knew the depth of how much the face of Rhode Island has changed until we saw these hundreds and thousands of people, many of them young, out really for the first time hearing. Now, some people saw it as anger, some people saw it as rioting, but if you kind of got through the noise, there was a real message there and a real frustration that I think it hasn't been addressed by the establishment ever.
The one thing I would say, it's a little off point, but I have, and this is purely anecdotal, I have several friends with houses in the city, not the east side, like less fancy neighborhoods. They're all talking about leaving. And the reason is when you go to downtown Providence, it feels like it did when I got here in the early 80s. It feels abandoned. It feels dirty. It feels a little scary. And these people are all saying, we don't know if we want to stick around to see how long it takes to come back. But I think there's something about downtown has really lost something. And with, Gracie's folding now or bankruptcy, how long will it take for Providence to come back?
Well, yeah, it's a microcosm of New York, isn't it? So many people have put up with whatever because of the Broadway, because of the great, great restaurants, all of the art scene and everything else. And now they're saying, why am I here?
Yeah, they're coming to Newport. And Steve, I think back to the State of the City address when Mayor Lorza came out, we were there, and the new Providence, that was the slogan that was being tossed around. And if this is the new Providence, it's not a good thing.
When you're running for office, you come up with these slogans, and they don't always pan out, do they?
No doubt about it. All right, last couple of minutes here. Let's kind of just briefly touch on the elections. I guess let's go left to right as I'm seeing it. Linda, decision 2020.
I'm going to punt on this because I'm not as well informed. I'll let you guys go on that one.
Jim Hummel.
Well, you know what? I'm actually looking forward to not so much chaos coming out of the White House every day. And I think a little boring will be good at this point. And, all eyes are on Georgia. What's going to happen in that Senate race? And I will tell you, as obstructionist as Mitch McConnell has been, he might do a favor, and I'm not the first to say this, for Joe Biden when if it does stay Republican, it means that progressive flank is going to have a little less to say. And that's the concern, I think, about the moderate Americans, that the AOCs and the squad and all of that on the left, if they have a Democratic Senate, it's what I said 4 years ago. I remember my kids, my daughter said the day after the election, she said, "Dad, it's like the day after we lost the national championship. Everybody's, walking around all grumpy, liberal Chapel Hill." And I said, "Alex, 4 years goes very quickly. Maybe not because you're, 20 years old now or 18, but it goes very quickly." And I said, "Hey, the Republicans have the keys to the car. They had both House, Senate, and the presidency. Let's see what they can do." Well, they didn't get so much done, and that corrected a little bit in the midterm. So, you remember it's really a 2-year cycle that the president has to be able to start getting stuff done. So I will be looking to see, does the Republican Senate stay Republican, and will they loosen up? Because at some point they've got to get a win. They've got people in the red states who are also without jobs, without paychecks, and all of that. So that's kind of the larger, who knows what's going to happen come January 20th. What we know is there's not going to be the craziness that Donald Trump has brought us the last 4 years.
Steve?
Well, in keeping with the maxim that all politics is local, I tend to focus on the local and the statewide races. And I think, the progressives had, and women had some successes in the state house races. House, Senate, that sort of thing. Nothing changed from a Democrat Republican. The big change, obviously, was Nick Mattiello's loss and the changing of the guard. I don't know how much change we'll see, but the changing of the guard and the leadership in the House. But how much will they meet even is a question. What's happening on the local level? I mean, this trickles down with this lack of funding and this lack of really any say in what goes on. It all goes back to the coronavirus situation that, we hear that things are going to become even more restrictive in the weeks to come. This is the most dangerous time. And, people are looking to their government, but not necessarily their local governments to help them out in this, because they've got no dough. And round it goes.
But also trying to conduct government via Zoom. I mean, talk
that's
about
tough.
it. I know somebody who was interested in a CRMC hearing last night. It was a local issue down there and a lot of environmental concerns. And there's like 40 people on. You're muted. You can't jump in. And when you talk, so I mean, the clunkiness of that. And Linda, you've covered enough of those meetings, haven't?
Frustrating.
How frustrating that is, and that's not really government. Now, we know that's not going to be that way forever, but, government likes to take the path of least resistance. Zoe's walking in, so hey, Zoe. Not barking, Lynn, but she's here. The government takes the path of least resistance, and Zoom gives a lot of these public officials cover under the guise of safety. And I'm not saying that we can't be doing that now, but when are we going to get back to in-person, let's make decisions and hear from the people who are paying your salaries kind of meetings? That's my only thought.
Look at the just yesterday, the federal court said they're going to do trials on Zoom or some similar means. It's tough. I can't imagine doing that. I wound up. I never cover trials anymore. That used to be my bread and butter. But we had the Jeff Britt trial earlier this year, which was the first trial conducted in court. Unbelievable restrictions had to be put in place to observe the spacing and that sort of thing in the courtroom. This is going to happen for some time to come in all aspects of government, I'm afraid. And I think we had the chief judge of the family court on our air this morning talking about how essentially everything is done online now, with the exception of trials, and they're still working that out.
It's going to be a very interesting rebuilding process, and what sticks around and what is, what goes back to quote unquote normal. But then, I even thought we'll might be doing interviews mostly by Zoom going forward.
Is everybody getting the shot?
Yeah, I'm beginning. Lynn, we're getting into that category now that we're, Steve too, we're a little bit older. Maybe we need the vaccine soon.
Yeah, I think I need the vaccine.
I'm not sure. Bill, the other thing I was going to tell you is we do the year-ender for Lively.
Yep.
And I was joking. Dave Lehman sent me, we always go back and look what they predicted. Of course, it's going to be nothing what I predicted. Yeah. Lehman said, I predicted that a pandemic was going to come in March and that we were going to go to remote learning and that small businesses were, and all that. Of course, very tongue-in-cheek. But It's going to be interesting to go back because nobody saw any of this on the horizon.
Yeah, I can't wait to see Ian Donis's picks for what 2020 was supposed to look like, All right, last couple of seconds here. I guess just what you're, even on a personal level, what do you want to see in 2021? What's the big, knowing that the virus is still going to be here, knowing we're still facing the inequities and this, that, and the other, what would you like to see in 2021? We'll start with the Providence Journal's Linda Borg.
I would like to see a plan in the Rhode Island schools where they're more all on the same page. So in the pandemic, every day I was chasing this school closed down for this reason. It speaks to the problem that we have 36 public school districts and they're each doing their own thing. And it all depends on how much money your taxpayers have. I would like to see a really strong effort by the GA to introduce some, what's the word I want? Some
regionalization is one.
Evenness across the board. So we don't have, now we have like 30 charters. There's no consistency. That's the word I'm looking for.
Jim?
It's a pipe dream, but I would love to hear from more than just the handful or three people we hear from every week at the briefings. I think the governor, it was a brilliant stroke when she brought in the doctors, Dr. Foreman particularly, and Dr. Sooner. But the substance got lost in the style because she made them wait there for 40 minutes on stage. And so not that they're taking my advice, here's a little media advice. Governor, 20 minutes. There's nothing more that you can get it all in 20 minutes. If the doctor has to stand up and say something, and then open it up and give us 40 minutes of questions. And if you feel like you can't answer those, maybe you need to bring more people in. So I loved hearing Dr. Foreman. I mean, that was one of the most powerful deliveries that we've heard. But I will tell you, it got, we had to wait so long. And one poor doctor, Otis somebody, he never spoke. And I thought, that guy could either be taking a nap or treating patients. He's sitting there thinking, what am I doing here? So that's my pipe dream. I'm not sure it's going to come through.
Yeah, let's keep the questions under 5 minutes in 2021 as well from the media, and as a rule of thumb as well. Maybe that's something.
And company excluded.
Yeah, sure. Steve?
I hope as many people as possible get the shot, and we can get this to where we can move on as soon as possible. Everyone misses the ability to get together with friends and family. Live music has been absent all of this time, and performance and theater and arts has all gone by the boards. I want to see another stimulus package that I think will go a long way towards easing the pain that a lot of people are still encountering, because it's really tough on a lot of families and a lot of individuals who just cannot, keep it together.
Linda Borg, the Providence Journal; Jim Hummel, the Hummel Report, Rhode Island PBS; Providence Journal, WPRO; Steve Klamkin, the Voice of Southern New England, WPRO, the region's largest newsroom, WPRO News, folks. Isn't that the slogan, or am I making that up?
Used to be.
Yeah, well, I still hear it at like
we're
5
much
in the morning.
We're much diminished, but we're still getting it done.
An all-star panel here.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
The conversation never stops on Twitter and Instagram at Bill Bartholomew, and in our Facebook group, simply head to btown.stream. That'll take you right there.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.